Hello, welcome to the BBC News programme where you help us report and discuss what's happening. I'm Ben James. This is World Have Your Say.
One faction of one party in one House of Congress, in one branch of government, doesn't get to shut down the entire government just to refight the results of an election.
What does the US government shutdown say about politics in America? The two houses of Congress failed to agree a new budget, so a partial shutdown of the functions of government has begun for the first time in 17 years. Does this show off the checks and balances which protect US democracy? Or does it show a dysfunctional system struggling to cope? With your help, we'll explain what the shutdown means and hear a group of Americans discuss how it reflects on their country. You can tweet with the hashtag WHYS to ask them a question.
This is Lise Doucette from BBC News. You're listening to World Have Your Say.
Hello there, welcome. It's lunchtime in Washington, D.C. and more than 13 hours since the deadline passed for the two houses of the US Congress to agree on a budget. They didn't, so as September turned into October, the partial shutdown of the US federal government began. I can see countdown clocks on US TV networks counting the hours and minutes of the shutdown so far. We'll talk about what it actually means and how much it matters outside Washington. We'll hear from Seattle, Cleveland, Miami and Phoenix over the next hour. I can see your comments and questions too from Zambia, India and Uganda. What does the government shutdown say about politics in America? Mabu in Port Harcourt, Nigeria tweets, "The US shutdown's a sign of a healthy democracy where issues are discussed without fist fighting." Well, if you're listening in the US, we'll find out if you agree. I'm Ben James. You can ask your questions on Twitter as well. Use the hashtag WHYS.
Tweet us using the hashtag
WHYS.
And in the last few minutes, while you are hearing the BBC News Bulletin, President Obama's been speaking in the garden at the White House. Let's hear what he had to say.
At midnight last night, can everybody hear me? Mic working? Good morning, everybody. At midnight last night, for the first time in 17 years, the Republicans in Congress chose to shut down the federal government. Let me be more specific. One faction of one party in one House of Congress, in one branch of government, shut down major parts of the government, all because they didn't like one law. This Republican shutdown did not have to happen, but I want every American to understand why it did happen. Republicans in the House of Representatives refused to fund the government unless we defunded or dismantled the Affordable Care Act. They've shut down the government over an ideological crusade to deny affordable health insurance to millions of Americans. In other words, they demanded ransom just for doing their job. And many representatives, including an increasing number of Republicans, have made it clear that had they been allowed by Speaker Boehner to take a simple up or down vote on keeping the government open, with no partisan strings attached, enough votes from both parties would have kept the American people's government open and operating. Now, we may not know the full impact of this Republican shutdown for some time. It will depend on how long it lasts. But we do know a couple of things. We know that the last time Republicans shut down the government in 1996, it hurt our economy. And unlike 1996, our economy is still recovering from the worst recession in generations. We know that certain services and benefits that America's seniors...
That's President Obama speaking a few minutes ago in the garden at the White House. And just down the road from him, Mark Bloomfield sitting listening to him in our BBC Washington studio, an economist, president of the American Council for Capital Formation. Hi, Mark. Welcome to World Have Your Say.
Well, thank you for allowing me to be on the show.
And Rebecca Cinderbrand's with us as well, the Deputy White House Editor for Politico. Hi there, Rebecca. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
And maybe I can start with you. We heard President Obama's version of why this has happened. What are the Republicans' version of what happened?
Well, the Republicans are saying what they've been saying all along, that in their version of events, it's the White House's fault that the government is shut down because of its insistence on funding Obamacare. Of course, that leaves out a lot of pieces, including the fact that the Senate is solidly behind the president. But they're very much framing this as the White House has embraced Obamacare, the White House is insisting on Obamacare, and that's why the government has shut down.
We need to do a bit of a shutdown dictionary here, Mark and Rebecca. We've got lots of words flying around here that are very specific to this situation, so hopefully you can help me briefly with them. Mark, what is a shutdown exactly?
A shutdown means that there is no more money for the government to operate. Under our Constitution, the Congress every year gives the executive branch money to operate, and that ran out of money to operate the government on October 1.
Rebecca?
And, one of the things we kind of have to point out, and one of the reasons the president has been drawing such a hard line here, is that what the government was operating under is something, not to get too technical, called a continuing resolution. So this isn't even the budget for the next year we're talking about. This is just a budget that was supposed to get the government through the next few weeks. There's another fight coming up in just a couple of weeks, the same thing all over again over the next budget. And there's also another fight coming up in just about 2 weeks now over the debt ceiling, which is another issue entirely. All three of those involve actions that the president has said Congress has to take, not as a matter of negotiation, but as part of their responsibility.
Another word for the shutdown dictionary that I've seen flying around a lot is furlough. Mark, what does that mean? That's something to do with the workers that will no longer be able to work.
Yes, because there is no money, as Rebecca said, for funding the government right now. There are 800,000, I think, government employees, because there's no money to pay them, who have to take a forced holiday. The ones that are needed to run the government have to work without pay, and the others just are told to stay home and not collect their salary.
And there are a few, just a handful of military members of the active duty military, for example, who will be paid. A special last-minute bill signed by the president last night, sent to him by Congress, will ensure that active duty members of the military serving in harm's way will get their pay. But there are many Defense Department civilian employees who won't.
And Isaac listens to us in Nairobi, Kenya, posting on our Facebook page, wants to know, does this mean that all government institutions will be closed? Mark?
No. You will still, people on Social Security will still get their checks. As Rebecca pointed out, the military is still going to be working. The sort of examples of things that are going to be closed down are like the national parks. There's a big sign if you go to Yosemite that says you can't. The park is shut down because of the what Congress did and didn't appropriate money. So a lot of the essential government services will be provided. Some will not be provided, and some will be in a situation where necessary workers show up and unnecessary workers are told to go home.
And you talk about the various cultural institutions. The zoo as well has come up quite a lot. The panda cam, a lot of people are talking about as one example of something that will cease to function, a webcam showing the pandas in that zoo. But I'm told the animals will still be fed, Rebecca.
That's right. There's others also that, lots of symbolism involved. The same thing that happened during the last shutdown, the Statue of Liberty, national parks. Right now, the Google homepage here in the U.S. is celebrating national parks, the anniversary of one of our biggest national parks. National parks are shut down. People can't visit those. And so even though we're talking about, in some cases, symbolism, there's still a lot of it grabs the public's attention. Something that's getting a lot of attention in Washington right now is a group of World War II veterans who came to visit the memorial and just, were told it was shut down and decided to go visit it anyway. And so the symbolism of that is grabbing a lot of attention.
Well, let's hear from elsewhere now. We've heard from Washington, D.C., where you guys both are, and that's where this conversation is centred. But what does it mean to people around the rest of the US? Let's speak to Chris, who's in Seattle, to Nancy, who's in Virginia, and Skip, who is back with us on World Have Your Say from Jones Turkey Farm in Cleveland, Ohio. Hi there, Skip. Welcome back. Hi to Nancy and Chris as well.
How are you? Thank you.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
Skip, what does this mean where you are?
Well, I don't know what it's going to mean to the individual around here, but what is the non-essential worker? But we're going to keep the the people who keep the government running. I'd like to know that. If they're non-essential, are they supposed to be there? What do they do? That's either here nor there. His speech was absolutely pathetic. A handful of Republicans shut this entire country down? Give me a break. Both of them they're into it up to their waist. Both of them. Both parties, doesn't matter. All they're doing is chest bumping. And we're going to see who can dump who out of the way. It's just disgusting. It really is.
Chris in Seattle, how does it look to you?
If he can exempt companies from the Health Care Act, which he has, he's exempted unions, companies, or maybe we should insert the word contributors. Why can't he postpone some of this stuff for a year?
OK, well, we'll get into some of that depth on that to explain to people a bit later. Chris in Seattle, how does it look to you?
Oh, well, being one of those non-essential employees here, I can tell Skip exactly what I do. I do policy analysis for the government, and I'm not at work today, despite the fact that I do have deadlines that will have to be met. Those will just have to be postponed.
So have you not gone in at all, Chris? Just explain that to us. You 10 in the morning, something like that in Seattle at the moment? Take us through your
10
day.
In the morning. I did go in earlier today to do my shutdown duties. I secured my office. I changed my outgoing voicemail message to say that I will not be answering calls. For me to do any work is actually a violation of the Anti-Deficiency Act, so I am not allowed to do any work whatsoever.
And so without that work, what could the consequences be?
Oh, I don't get paid. And I'm just waiting like the other 700,000 or 800,000 federal employees. I'm just waiting for the call to go back to work.
Will you not get paid, Chris, or will it be a delayed pay?
Right now, there's nothing official, but generally, when this happened 17 years ago, we were restored pay after a bit, so I may see it down the line. That's another one of my points. It's always, I remember Bill Clinton back 17 years ago standing there in front of cameras. The people aren't going to have enough money for a turkey for Thanksgiving, blah blah blah, and everybody got paid. I mean, it's going to everything will be fine. We're going to do this chest bumping for a couple 3 weeks. Yeah, but this chest bumping didn't need to happen, and it's really pathetic. It's very petty, and it's. I'm afraid I do have to agree that it's a small portion of individuals that the speaker agreed to say, no, we're not going to do this budget portion, despite the fact that the Affordable Care Act from the beginning was passed through legitimate legislation, and that even after that, the president was reelected, and even Senator McCain, who has never supported the Affordable Care Act, said on the Senate floor that this is not the proper way to run the government. That really, if the Republicans want to change this law or repeal it or alter it or whatever they want to do, they need to win elections. They need to control both chambers and have a veto-proof majority or occupy the White House as well.
Let's bring in Nancy, who's listening to both of you. Yeah, let's bring in Nancy. Go on, Nancy, because you're the mum of sons in the military, Nancy, and we know that the government has guaranteed that those in the military will get paid through all of this. But how are you seeing what's happening in Washington?
Well, let's keep in mind that my sons are still suffering from the sequestration. And
maybe that's another word we need to get explained in just one moment, but go on.
Okay, well, to your last gentleman who was just speaking and mentioning that this was now the law of the land, which is true. The Supreme Court actually did not uphold the law, though. It stripped it of major pieces and said that the core funding of this mechanism could only stand if it was a tax on the American people and not mandatory. This law is mandatory. And let's remember, this is not about health care. This is about health insurance. And we as Americans are being forced by our government to purchase insurance. And that has always been completely different. Now, okay, so it's the law of the land. That's great. You want to say that it's passed? This is the way it's going to be? Then why has there been 1,200 waivers being sent out?
And Nancy and Chris and Skip, sorry for interrupting there, but there's such a lot of detail in this. I'm wondering, for those people listening all around the world who are not so close to this story. What do you think of America's image when it comes to this situation? How do you think that this will reflect on your country, Skip?
Well, it's probably pretty laughable. I guess I would, if I was out in another country looking, I'd probably laugh. I mean, I'm laughing myself. I agree with Chris. It's very, very petty. A handful of people, I doubt that. But this is all orchestrated. I'm telling you, everything's going to be fine in 3-4 weeks. Nobody's going to starve. Nobody's going to starve the children or poison the water. Everything's going to be fine.
We have an amendment in our Constitution, Amendment 28, that says the Congress shall not make any laws that apply to the citizens of the United States.
I'm not sure what happened there on that line to Nancy. We're getting some interruption there in it. We'll try to restore that in just one moment. But go on, Chris, you were trying to come in there as well.
Well, I was saying, if the law's been struck down and parts of it were struck down, then they can't be implemented. And I just don't understand. There is a provision that people do have to have insurance. People can choose not to obey the law. They just run the risk of, being fined and then trying to figure out how they're going to pay their bills when their children, or other loved ones end up in a hospital because of an accident or an illness. But I think more than the details of the Affordable Care Act, it's just the use of the parliamentary system to make a change to a law that's already in effect that is just kind of to the ordinary person kind of pathetic. It doesn't matter if it's the Affordable Care Act or if it's another piece of legislation. It's just counterproductive. And it's a loophole there, but it's counterproductive to everything.
I can see President Obama just finishing his comments on screen in the White House Rose Garden, hugging some of the people that he was standing next to as he gave that speech. I can see on the Reuters news agency them picking out the line, ideological crusade. That's what the president was blaming Republicans for during this situation. And Nancy, what do you think of him using that phrase?
I think he is notorious for pointing fingers at others, and he fails to see the 3 fingers pointing back at himself. This is his. He owns this, and it's wrapped around his neck. He owns this shutdown, not anybody else. The Republicans have come back 4 times to ask them, okay, this is the law of the land, then you make it law of the land for everybody and take away those waivers that you've given to your special groups like unions and big corporations and Congress.
But at the same time, when the Affordable Care Act was put together, the Democrats reached out to the Republicans to contribute to it. And every single time, John Bonnier and the Republican Party said, no, we're not going to play. So guess what? They got what they asked for, Nancy.
They had plenty of pork barrel mixed in with that as well, and it. And that is what was turned down. Now we are specifically talking about this Obamacare bill. And this is what the American people are upset about. Now, all of a sudden, everybody's premiums are not going down. They are going up. Doctors are retiring.
I think everybody's is a big exaggeration.
And Rebecca and Mark, who are listening to you both in Washington, D.C., we've heard passionate statements on both sides of the fence there. Rebecca, does that encapsulate a little, and Mark too, does that encapsulate a little of what we're seeing in this polarised debate, Mark?
Well, I'd like to put it in the following context. One of Rebecca's competitors, magazines, although I worship Politico, but a competitor said that October 1, we went from a dysfunctional political system to a non-functional political system. In other words, October 1 may really be a defining moment. So that is sort of the view that we're really messed up. The other view is the following. I'm looking at a recent commentary by a well-known American historian who says American politics has always been in the arena for angry minds. In recent years, we have seen angry minds at work, mainly among extreme right-wingers who have now demonstrated how much political leverage can be got out to the animosities and passions of a small minority. That statement was made by Richard Hofstadter in 1963 delivered at Oxford University in 1963, and it described the Goldwater movement. My point is that this may be very controversial, but we've been through this before, and it's, I think, very interesting to put it in a historical context.
And just to kind of put it in a little bit of just to kind of put a finer point on it, the historical context is great. And looking at where we are right now in terms of where things stand, the dilemma for John Boehner, for Speaker Boehner right now is, as the White House has been urging them to do, is to just put what's called a clean bill on the floor, basically to put the budget through without any kind of Obamacare additions added to it. And there's plenty of evidence right now that if he did that, that bill would pass. The problem, of course, for Speaker Boehner is that it would pass with mostly Democratic votes. And from the perspective of him keeping his job as leader of Republicans in the House, that's something he just can't do.
And Rebecca, can I just ask as well, we've heard a lot about Obamacare in the last 20 minutes on this programme. Can you explain that in a nutshell, if it's possible?
Sure. Well, I mean, trying to explain Obamacare in a nutshell is pretty tough order. But essentially, there's a large group of millions and millions of uninsured people in the United States who don't have insurance through their employers or through any of the government-provided insurance, such as Medicare, Medicaid, which applies to elderly people and to people who are too poor to afford health insurance, kind of people who fall in the middle. And so Obamacare was created as an attempt. This has been, an issue in American life for decades now, to try to address that problem. And one of its main features is that people who are uninsured will be able to join together and create pools of uninsured. And then once you have these big pools, they'll be able to purchase private insurance through state-based exchanges that'll be set up. A lot of states with Republican governors decided not to set up their own exchanges. So the federal government has had to set up exchanges for residents of those states. And one of the interesting things for Republicans right now is, if the government shutdown were not taking place, one of the dominant stories today might be some of the glitches and some of the problems that the White House had warned us in advance to expect on the first day that these exchanges were rolled out. We are seeing those glitches. Of course, it's to be expected, and the White House warned about it. That would be the dominant storyline. But they've kind of stepped on that storyline, and so now the attention for much of the public is not as much on the problems with Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act, which is the technical name, but instead on the government dysfunction and the shutdown. And, so in a sense, the opponents of Obamacare have stepped on their message a bit there.
And in just the last few minutes, Rebecca, the Barack Obama Twitter account has tweeted the Affordable Care Act is still open for business. President Obama on Obamacare, it says. So certainly his people trying to push forward that line as this discussion continues. And Chris Ayres is in Washington tweeting using the hashtag WHYS. What scares me about the shutdown is that this could run into the debt ceiling talk, not raising the debt ceiling, much worse. And again, that's a phrase that will get explained in the second half of the programme, something we've heard a little about so far, and that's something on the horizon as the next big conversation perhaps in the US. And we've got lots of more of your comments coming in from around the world. Dirk is in Canada tweeting using Shutdown. Dear US citizens, we can't make a decision, so we're shutting down all the services / the economy. Signed, your elected officials. There's some tongue-in-cheek comments. There's also a government shutdown pickup lines hashtag going on Twitter. I think lots of people trying to turn this into comedy online, and we'll see whether our American guests we've gathered from all around the country find it funny a bit more in the second half of the programme, as well as hearing a little more from the President and what he said in the last half hour. On this edition of World Have Your Say, we've gathered a group of Americans to talk about the partial shutdown of their country's government. With polarised politicians failing to agree a budget, some of the things the federal government pays for are temporarily closed. What do you think the situation says about US politics? If you want to respond to what you're hearing as you listen, you can post on facebook.com/World Have Your Say.
This is Lise Doucette from BBC News. You're listening to World Have Your Say.
Hello, welcome back. We've heard from all corners of the United States so far on the programme. Let's hear from a few more states like Oklahoma, where Roy has posted on Facebook. Part of a congressperson's job is to make compromises with the other side. They aren't even doing that anymore. Anyone else who failed to do their job would have been fired a long time ago. And Chase Jones has tweeted using the hashtag Shutdown. Government has shut down before the world did not blow up. It's a good indicator of what parts of government are not needed. We're talking on this edition of World Have Your Say about the government shutdown in the United States. We've gathered Americans from all different walks of life, some of whom have been on World Have Your Say before, to talk about what this says about their politicians, their political system, and how it reflects on their country amongst voters there and the rest of the world. If you'd like to take part in the conversation and respond to what you're hearing, you can post on facebook.com/World Have Your Say.
Find out more about World Have Your Say.
bbc.com/World Have Your Say.
Well, some of our guests from the first half are still with us. Mark Bloomfield, an economist and CEO of the American Council for Capital Formation. He's with us from Washington, D.C., from our studio there. Skip Jones is live with us from his turkey farm in Cleveland, Ohio. And let's bring in James Poulos, who's in Los Angeles, a contributor to Vice, to Forbes and to the Daily Beast. Welcome, James, to World Have Your Say.
Thank you for having me.
And you wrote a piece called More Shutdowns, Please, the Pro-Democracy Case for an Obamacare Crisis. Now, we've heard a couple of other people tweet that maybe this shows the best of US democracy. What's the argument you were making in your piece?
Well, look, if you're a member of Congress, you have two responsibilities. One is to represent your constituents, and the other is to be true to your conscience. That is your political obligation. And if you have the tools available to force the issue in a way that could bring about a government shutdown if the other side doesn't have the votes to pass a funding bill, then that's something that you're able to use, and I think that's something you should use. I think we'd be better off if members of both parties weren't so devoted to their party line and represented their conscience and their constituents a bit more.
Mark, what do you make of that?
I think that we should also keep in mind that making laws is like making sausages. It gets a little messy, and two things will happen. One is there'll be some sort of political resolution. That is to say, there'll be offers back and forth. Or what I also fear, and the debt ceiling is a much more significant concern, and that will bump into the shutdown. And I really fear that there may be a financial market response and an economic response, and God forbid we could have a repeat of 2008.
And help us out again just one moment with our shutdown dictionary. We've done the word shutdown itself, we've done furlough in the first half, and Obamacare too. What's debt ceiling for those who aren't so close to this?
Debt ceiling is the United States government is authorized to borrow $16.7 trillion. And around October 17th, we will have reached that limit. And the president can no longer borrow money. What they do is they sell notes, bonds to the public. He can no longer do that unless Congress gives him the authority to do so. And if he doesn't have the authority to do so, we'll get a downgrade in our credit. There will be turmoil around the world in financial markets because the United States will no longer look like a sound creditor.
Thanks for explaining that. And if you've got any more words for our glossary you'd like explained, use the hashtag WHYS on Twitter. Let us know and we'll ask our guests. And Ellis is with us now as well, a politics student in her final year at university in Arlington, Virginia. Hi, Ellis. Welcome to World Have Your Say.
Hi, how are you?
Great to have you with us again. Very well, thanks. And while you're there, let's just listen to a bit more of what President Obama had to say in the Rose Garden in the last half an hour. And he was quick to blame his political opponents for the crisis.
This Republican shutdown did not have to happen. But I want every American to understand why it did happen. Republicans in the House of Representatives refused to fund the government unless we defunded or dismantled the Affordable Care Act. They've shut down the government over an ideological crusade to deny affordable health insurance to millions of Americans.
President Obama. Elissa, what do you think of what he says there?
Well, I think that you definitely have to consider that it's not just the Republicans right now in Congress. both parties. Both parties are just as equal to blame for the shutdown. You know, the Republicans in the House this morning and last night passed 4 bills to fund the government, just not fund Obamacare and push it off. And the Democrats in the Senate and Harry Reid are saying, no, we don't want that. We're not going to compromise. So for him to sit there and play his usual blame game of blaming the Republicans, it's just uncalled for and really immature. It shows definitely a lack of leadership on his part. I mean, Chris Christie said it best this morning. He needs to get his Congress under control. He needs to act like more of a leader, and he needs to control them from essentially every 5 minutes when the Democrats don't get what they want, going and running to the media. Sit down, you know, talk to John Boehner, talk to Harry Reid and say, let's get to a compromise that works for everyone. For him to just sit there and blame one party, again, is just typical of his style of politics, and it's just unfair. And
you talk about Chris Christie there. He's the Republican governor of New Jersey. I think we have Chris back with us from Seattle, and also Skip's still there in Cleveland, Ohio. We heard the word immature there. We've heard pathetic and petty. I'm just wondering, Skip, tell us what you think of your politicians in the US at the moment.
Well, I don't think very much of them. I used to be a Republican. I don't know what I am now. I honestly believe that. I don't know what I am.
Have you ever thought much of them? I mean, is this a change in the way that you view the political system?
The change, it's great when they're here at home. The Senator Brown is a wonderful guy, Democrat. I think he's a very caring individual. Get him to Washington, and he just fits right in with this regime. It's crucify the opponents.
So you feel they're one way when they're at home and one way when they're in the Capitol?
I don't think there's any question about that.
Chris, how about you in Seattle?
Well, I tend to agree. I think that what's really happening is that really to hold office these days, you need to be beholden to your party. There's very little room anymore for people who have any sort of independent thought. I had to laugh earlier at the reference to Goldwater and how he was so far right wing. Fast forward 40 years, Goldwater today would be considered a very moderate Republican. So
there's no doubt.
And it's just kind of, it's really a sad state of affairs, and it gets very frustrating when it boils down to something like this. And perhaps maybe if they could sit back and listen to themselves for a while, they'd see what idiots they are.
I have to, kind of pitch in here, though, because from Inside the Beltway and for your European listeners, it's what we call, Washington, D.C. lifestyle, basically. It's very different here. I mean, we're very focused on, not only the big picture of, the government shutting down. And yes, I have sympathy for the government shutting down, don't get me wrong, but people, kind of look at it and act like, oh, well, it doesn't affect anyone, it affects them as much as it affects us, if less, But I personally, and again, living inside the Beltway, it affects us more than most people in the country see it. I mean, we're so populated here with workers that are government workers that you literally ask your friends and you're, talking to your friends, and almost everyone you're talking to is on furlough right now. So it's definitely a very different outlook from when you're inside the Beltway and when you're dealing with politics. Every second of your life is consumed with politics here. So I think that, you can say that they're different when they go home, but they all have the same goals, and they still say it when they're here. They still say, our constituents want us to fight to defund Obamacare, and that's what we're doing while we're here. You elected us on that, and that's what we're doing while we're here.
And that is, essentially, I agree, that's what they're elected to do. But any room for independent thought these days, it seems to have gone out the window. Now, I've been working with the federal government for 25 years under various administrations, working with various members of Congress and their staffs. And, I can appreciate how different things are in the other Washington, but it's still I still think that if they could sit back and look at themselves from their constituents' eyes.
You have to understand how much pressure they are under to conform with the party.
Well, what? If they can't stand the pressure, honey, they need to get out of the kitchen. They just need to get out. They need to find another line of business.
But you need to understand, at the end of the day, they still have to work with people across the aisle. They can't. Yes, it's so great to sit there and say, that guy sitting across the aisle is a jerk.
Well, hang on. Let's just stop both of you talking at once, because we can't hear what either of you are saying. Just one moment, because it's really interesting stuff I'm hearing. And if we're talking about pressure, is there more pressure now than before? What's led to this atmosphere that puts people under so much pressure from their parties, if that is indeed the case, Alyssa? What do you think?
I would say that there's more pressure now than ever before. I mean, we're talking about very high-stake legislation. Take, for example, Tim Huelskamp from Kansas, I believe. He's a great representative, very fresh in the game, very fresh ideas. But when he didn't vote with how the party wanted him to vote for it, John Boehner slashed all the committees he was on. So, I mean, if you're a colleague looking at him and you're saying, shoot, I really want to stay on this committee so I can go back to my constituency and say all the great things I'm doing, you're probably going to feel a lot more pressure to vote in line with your party.
James, in Los Angeles, do you think there's something in that?
I'm sorry. Here's what I think. It's true that Americans are becoming increasingly alienated from both parties. The reason why Congress has such an abysmal approval rating is because both parties are, I think, trying to legislate morality. The president says that his opponents are waging an ideological crusade, but supporters of Obamacare believe that no matter how bad of a bill this is, it must be supported for moral reasons because it's the most moral available option for supplying health care. That's an ideological crusade as well. So when both parties are putting forward ideological crusades where they're seeking to legislate morality at the highest levels of government, I think what you're going to get is an increasing amount of frustration among American voters and about people who want to see more independent and thoughtful views advanced in Congress.
And if it's the case...
But just because
Go on, Alyssa. Sorry to interrupt.
Just because something is moral doesn't mean it's necessarily the right legislation for the country. You have to look at how much this bill costs. I mean, economically, I don't think our country is ready for that type of hefty legislation and cost. We can barely afford to pay our own bills now. When we add the cost of this onto everything else, it's just so out of the picture and unrealistic that it's just too much to even think about.
Alyssa, I'm wondering what Skip, who's listening to you from his turkey farm in Ohio, thinks of this. And on that point, Skip, about ideology, do you think, watching politics from where you are over a number of years, do you think that politics has got more ideological on both sides?
Well, I got to agree with that. And Allison makes such a great point about the cost of this whole thing. Anyway, the first thing, Allison, is it not, do you agree or disagree that this fight and any other political fight is all about the power and the control of the checkbook in Washington? Do you not think that?
Well, I agree that it's, about the power of the checkbook and Congress holds that power, but when it comes down to it, we can't afford it. So why are you going to push things into legislation that we can't afford? And that's not responsible.
We're 16 trillion and counting.
I mean, if you're an American family and, you're looking at your expenses and you can't afford to take a vacation with your family, that vacation's really nice and it looks really appetizing and, it may create a memory that defines your family or whatever. But when it comes down to it, if you can't afford it and you have to decide between paying to feed your family or taking that extra vacation, I think you're going to pick the more, responsible choice of feeding your family over that vacation. And it's the same thing with Congress. They can't pay the bill.
Yeah, but we as individuals can't keep putting money on the credit card and not pay it off. We can't do that.
Exactly. You don't have that option, and Congress shouldn't either.
And let me just jump in, because I want to remind everyone you're listening to World Have Your Say on the BBC. We're talking about this US government shutdown. We've gathered Americans, some of whom have been on the programme before, to reflect on what's happened in Washington in the last 24 hours. Elissa, I know you've got to go now. You've got an exam to go to, is that right? What's it on?
It's actually on constitutional law.
Well, there we go. And, good luck with that. And maybe over the last day you've perhaps got more stuff to write about. I don't know. We're going to bring in Nicole Hemmer, who's live with us in a part of the US we've not spoken to yet on this programme. You're in Miami, Florida. Welcome, Nicole, to World Have Your Say, a political historian and commentator there. Now, Nicole, some people on the programme have referred back 17 years to what happened when the government shut down under Bill Clinton's presidency. Just put what's happened today into some historical context for us.
Right. So the U.S. has experienced, this is actually the 18th government shutdown since 1976, which is when all of this started. Yes, so the longest government shutdown was in 1995, 1996, when Republicans in Congress were facing off against the Democratic president, Bill Clinton. There is a pretty distinct difference between the shutdown 17 years ago and the shutdown today, and that really goes down to that the Republicans in 1995 and 1996 had just won landslide victories in the 1994 election, and so really felt that they had the public on their side. They felt that they had a mandate. In this case, especially when it comes down to the Affordable Care Act, that's not really the case. Republicans won the midterms of 2010, but since then, there was the 2012 election when President Obama won re-election and Democrats made gains in both the House and the Senate. So there's a sense in which the Republicans who have caused the shutdown don't necessarily have the public on their side or don't have the same mandate that Republicans had in the 1995-96 shutdown.
OK, thanks for explaining that. And go on. Is that James? Because I'm interested in bringing James in as well to discuss this with Nicole. Do you worry? I know the piece that you wrote has essentially argued that we just lost James. In fact, I've just been told. So let's ask one of you others to pick up on that. And Mark, do you worry that this might become the norm in government?
I think that time will tell. But as I said earlier, some commentators believe we've gone from dysfunctionality to non-functionality, and that is a big concern. And that is why I fear that the final resolution may come outside of the normal political process, and that is the financial and economic crisis like we had in 2008.
James, you're back in Los Angeles. Respond to that if you heard it. I was asking about whether this might become the norm in government. Presumably from the tone of your piece, you don't think that that's a concern.
Well, it wouldn't be a bad thing. I mean, it varies depending on the issue. So there is a more serious issue with the debt ceiling, but some of that is animated, unfortunately, just by raw fear. It is possible to have an orderly halt to the debt ceiling expenditure. But because of the markets and the way that they are, everyone's very nervous from 2008. Much of it is a confidence game, and so that is one area where there are more serious implications if there is another shutdown or halt that's coming.
Got some more questions in actually about the implications of this, and maybe this one, Mark, is for you. Mabu in Nigeria, another one from Nigeria. Who pays for the damage or cost of a shutdown to the Americans? Well, that is, I guess, implying that there definitely will be a damage or a cost. And can it be quantified, Mark, what this will cost, either in addition to what would normally be spent? Presumably it costs less if you're not paying employees.
Well, the real cost really isn't the amount that you're paying the employees. The real cost is the damage to the economy, because all that spending by government employees and government is taken out of the equation, and all economists believe that the economy will take a hit. If the economy takes a hit, obviously everybody will pay the cost.
And Jeff posts on Facebook, do the congressmen and senators get paid during the government shutdown? Do we know that?
They do get paid. They get paid because it's part of the Constitution. So they get paid, their staffs don't.
Well, let's go back to some of our voters around the US. We've got Skip with us in Ohio. And as we go through the final few minutes, Skip, maybe you could lead us off on this. Do you think that your democracy is something to be proud of?
Oh, well, sure. I mean, I'm proud of this country, and this will all get worked out. We're just in a finger-pointing mode down in Washington, and whoever can stand the longest and point the longest, they're going to win. There's no question who's going to win. I mean, Republicans they're out of office for the next probably 12 years, I would say. It'd take them at least 12 years to get through this. They're not going to come out of this thing smelling like any kind of a rose. They've dug a hole and now they're getting buried.
Chris?
Yeah, well, I tend to agree. I mean, this is our process. I'm glad this is our process. We can have a lot worse things in terms of the way we operate our government. It's just gotten to the point where it's frustrating. But as somebody pointed out earlier, making laws is like making sausage. You really don't want to know what goes into it.
It's a good line. It's a good line, although some sausages, I'm sure, are full of the finest ingredients, so we can't slander every sausage that's out there. Who else wanted to pick up on that?
So I was just going to jump in and say I probably disagree that it's going to put the Republicans out of power for the next 12 years. In many ways, the Republicans are going to take a little bit of a hit. It's unlikely to be one that gives the Democrats back the House in 2014. And in many ways, the Republicans have already won on the specifics. They've won as far as keeping in place sequester spending. They'll give in on the Obamacare stuff, but when it comes to the budgetary stuff, they've already won the budget battle on that.
Oh, you're absolutely right. But they're taking a hit politically. You can't. When you run for office and you just go around the country giving everything away but the kitchen sink, you're going to get votes, and you make no bones about it. Here, you can all have cell phones and free cell phones, and just vote for me. I mean, this happened right up here in Cleveland. People
I'm also wondering.
It's going to take them a while to get over this.
Ben, can I throw in an optimistic note?
Oh, go ahead.
Given the fact that I've been the pessimist of the bunch, and you can always count on Americans to do the right thing after they've tried everything else, said by a great fan of BBC, Winston Churchill.
I'm just wondering if even though this may not come back to bite the Republicans in the backside, I'm still wondering if there will be repercussions at the midterm elections. After the 95 shutdown, they did take a hit, and Newt Gingrich lost a lot of face time after that, and I'm wondering, if there's the potential for that come November 2014.
And will there be repercussions, perhaps not only to do with election results themselves, but maybe the way politics is done in America? I mean, do any of you think that needs to change in some way? Can it change?
Ben, there's two sort of contradictory themes out here. On the one hand, politicians, members of Congress, are less dependent on their party because they are independent fundraisers. So that's why they're in some ways able to spring from their party leadership. On the other hand, because the parties have become so polarized, the Republicans are worried about a challenge from the right in their party, and the Democrats are worried about a challenge from the left. So in that sense, it makes them less susceptible to compromise.
How would you change politics in America, Skip, if you had a magic wand to wave over Washington?
Oh, my God. I'm stunned. I wouldn't know how to answer that.
I mean, is it something you think you have any effect over?
I don't know.
Is it something you feel like you have any effect over those representatives in Washington? You were talking earlier on about how you see a difference when they're at home compared to when they're in Washington. Do you feel powerless?
Well, in a sense, because believe me, I was sincere about that, Senator Brown. A heck of a nice guy, and I think he's very sincere about helping people, but My God in heaven, he gets in Washington. He's so far to the left. It's incomprehensible. I don't understand it. People hold too much power. I don't know. I don't know why that is. How one or two or three people can hold so much power, control every one of these congressmen and senators. I don't know how that's happened.
So you'd want politics to be kind of more dispersed in the way that the centres of power are divided up, rather than have a couple of party leaders organise everything.
You got to be a little bit more open. We don't know what goes on there. We need to. I'm over here in a farm, and I don't know what they say in the back rooms of Washington. And they're doing that. Both parties sit there and they figure out this and that, and we can give them that. We'll get this in the long run, and I'll vote for that bill for you. I need your vote. Christ, that's been known for years. That's what them dealings go on down there. You vote for my bill, and I'll give you support and that thing you want next month or whatever.
Skip, it's great to speak to you again from your turkey farm in Ohio, and to all of our guests, thanks very much. We heard from Elisa in Virginia, from Nancy, also in Virginia, in Fredericksburg, Chris, who is at home today, a federal employee. He's in Seattle, and he's been affected by the shutdown. Thanks ever so much to Mark Bloomfield, economist from the American Council for Capital Formation, in our studio in Washington, D.C., to Nicole Hemmer, a political historian in Miami, James Polos in Los Angeles, to all of our guests on World Have Your Say, and go to bbc.com/news if you'd like further explanation and coverage of the government shutdown in the United States. We'll be back at 10:30 GMT tomorrow.